Booster.
Go.
Retro.
Go.
Fido.
Go fly.
Guidance.
Guidance go.
Econ.
We'll go fly.
Telview.
Go.
Control.
Go fly.
Inco.
We are go.
Network.
Go.
Recovery.
Go.
Capcom.
We're go fly.
Launch control. This is the G-Man. We are go for launch. And it is I, G. Gordon. All right, ladies and gentlemen, joining me now as my guest is Professor Anthony Davies. He's an affiliated scholar, a senior scholar at the Mercator Center at George Mason University and an associate professor of economics at Duquesne University. And Dr. Davis, thank you very much for sharing your time with us. We know you're a very busy man, and it's good of you to be with us.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
The problem with our tax code and what have you is really its complexity. I mean, from the perspective of the average taxpayer, he looks at that thing and he says, there's no way that I can figure this thing out. And so
right.
he's forced to go to a tax preparer who, and there are good ones and bad ones. And even if he adverts to the IRS and calls them up, if they give him bum information, he's not excused.
Right. Yeah, it's too bad for him.
Yeah, really, it's atrocious what's the way we treat the taxpayer. I mean, aside from how we fleece the taxpayer, just putting him through all this agony all the time. I mean, anybody with any kind of complexity at all has to use a preparer. I mean, I myself majored in tax law at law school, but I use a very fine certified public accountant firm.
Yes, and I buy insurance every year to insure myself against the IRS in case there's some error.
Yeah, it's just astonishing. What is the answer to this?
Well, the problem is that we've got a tax code that's some 67,000 pages. It has become this fog of complexity that politicians use to hide what they're doing to us. A good example is the case of withholdings. We think of withholdings as a good thing because the employer withholds our taxes so we don't have to get caught short at the end of the year. But the fact of the matter is, when the employer withholds your tax, you stop thinking of that as your money, and you start thinking of it as the government's money. And you can test this out. Ask the average person how much he spends a month on gas, and he'll probably be able to tell you. But ask him how much he spends on Social Security and Medicare tax, he probably has no idea. But the average American spends more a month on Social Security and Medicare tax than they do on gas.
Wow. I sometimes think that if the American people knew what the government is doing to them, we'd have a revolution.
I tend to agree, and it's becoming worse as time goes by. This business with the Buffett tax is the latest example. It doesn't matter whether you think that rich should pay more or less. The fact of the matter is, politicians, particularly in the White House, came out and said that the rich were paying a lower tax rate than the middle class. That is patently false. It's a lie, and they know it. What they were doing is quoting the marginal tax rate. That's the rate that's applied to the next dollar that you earn. But if you're asking the question, how much taxes do people pay, the marginal tax rate's completely irrelevant. What matters is the average tax rate. And the average tax rate for the top 1% is twice what it is for the middle-income Americans.
Yeah, and when they talk about, millionaires and billionaires and what have you, and you look at the fine print, it comes down to, $250,000 per household, and the typical small business is a subchapter S setup, and so it catches all these small businessmen rather than the millionaires and billionaires.
Yes, and I think we're going to see more of that, the defining down of the rich to include the middle class. And the reason we're going to see that is because we've tapped out the rich. There just aren't enough rich people in the country that we could, even if we tax them at 100% income, it wouldn't make a dent in the deficit. The politicians know that the real money is at the middle class, and so they're doing what they can to extend taxes down into the middle class level. And one way to do that is to start defining down what it means to be rich.
Yeah. Well, this business of fairness, for example, my understanding is that the upper 10% of income earners in this country pay something like 70% of the taxes.
Yes.
And then you have this whole swath of people who don't pay any taxes, much to speak of at all.
Yes, and that number's rising, and it's anywhere, depending on how you count them, from 40 to 50% of Americans are paying either paying no federal tax at all or getting money back from the government. And that's when you start to get more than 50% of the voters getting money back from the government, you now have an unstable situation where you're just going to spiral into more and more people voting for more and more taxes on an ever smaller group of people.
Yes, and this business of getting back, a lot of people, it's called the Earned Income Tax Credit, but it's supposed to be, a return of tax to them, but they weren't taxed in the first place.
That's right.
It's a dole. It's just handing them money.
Yeah, it's absolutely right. When you do your taxes, if you're in this category, you end up with a negative number at the end of the day, meaning that the government is going to now cut you a check for money that you never paid in.
Boy.
One of the things that people point to, they talk about tax fairness, and they say things like, well, the top 1% earn so much more than the middle class, they should pay more. Well, the fact of the matter is, if you look at the top 1% in the United States, the average top 1%er earns 30 times what the average middle American earns, 30 times. But he pays 60 times the amount of tax that the middle income American earns. So really, if you really want to jump on this fairness issue, what's really fair is that the middle income people and the lower income people should be paying more than they're paying.
Boy. Well, the Senate has refused to submit a budget for the past 3 years.
Yes.
How in the world are we to be expected to solve these problems when we can't even get the Senate of the United States to follow the law?
Yeah, absolutely. And part of the reason that they're getting away with this is there's not enough of a public outcry. And again, I go back to the idea of if you really want fairness, you're going to have to raise the taxes on the people who currently aren't paying taxes. And by that, I'm not advocating balancing the budget on the backs of the poor, the middle class. Rather, I'm saying, look, we've got a huge swath of American voters who aren't feeling the pain of the size of government. If they were feeling the pain of the size of government, we'd have a government that's a heck of a lot smaller today than it is.
Yes, and I think if the American people were not having their taxes withheld by their employer or and sent to the government, if they had to sit down on the 15th of April and write a check to the government for what they owe, they'd be screaming bloody murder.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, we'd see an immediate reduction in the size and scope of government. Another one of the I talk about gimmicks that the government uses to hide their taxes. This is in a paper I did for the Mercatus Center with my colleague Devin Bowen. One of the things we look at is this phenomenon of temporary taxes. You see this a little bit at the federal level, but very much at the state level, where politicians will see some problem and they'll jump in and say, well, let's impose a tax just to fix this thing. And what happens is they raise some money, they fix this problem, temporary problem, whatever it is, and after the problem goes away, the tax doesn't.
Yeah.
A good example of this is here in Pennsylvania, we have the Johnstown flood tax. It was instituted to help the people of Johnstown clean up after the flood that devastated their town. And people scratch their heads and they wonder, well, what is this Johnstown flood? Well, it happened 75 years ago. The tax just never went away.
Jeez. Oh, my. Well, I tell you, Dr. Davies, you have been very generous with your time, and I certainly hope that we can look forward to having you visit with us again.
I'm pleased to help. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's our pleasure. Anthony Davies, ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Anthony Davies, PhD.